Vamos a las oraciones para antes y después de las enseñanzas. A tomar refugio. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que puedo obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Y ahora vamos a la ofrenda de mandala breve. Sashi-puki Junshing Medo Tramri Ravlinshi Drokonanda Shila Chubasho Idam Guru Ranamandara Kamiyatayami.
So today we carry on with the practice on shamatha and going through the illimitable meditations. So the point of shamatha is that of itself it will not lead us, it will not give us enlightenment. Yes. Yeah. What about it? Okay. 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 No problem. Okay?
No.
Okay. So the point is that shamatha itself will not give us enlightenment, but it prepares the ground. The unprepared mind cannot cope with deeper levels of practice, like analyzing the mind and mental and material phenomena, and recognizing that which goes beyond the ordinary conceptual mind, because it is not a fit instrument to do so. It's as if you're a surgeon. Then, before the operation, you have to prepare your tools. You have to see that your scalpel is clean and sharp and capable of preparing for the operation. You will not do the operation with a blunt and rusty old knife. You have to have everything prepared properly so that one can go forth with confidence. So here we're working with the mind, and our ordinary, uncontrolled, wild mind simply cannot acquire the depth of practice needed for the breakthrough. Even if we get a momentary glimpse of something beyond the conceptual mind, it cannot last, because the basis is not yet ready to hold it. It's not prepared. So this is why it is so important to have a strong basis in its calm abiding meditation. One Lama said to me that if you have a strong shamatha, the rest of the Dharma is in the palm of your hands. But, we are very impatient. How long does it take to get enlightened? You know, really, people are always asking what is the quickest, easiest way. But ultimately, there is no quick, easy way, no matter what publicity is given to certain techniques. With a mind which is not ready, which is not prepared, even if, as I say, one gets some experiences, it will not be enough to really permeate the whole of the deeper levels of our consciousness. So this is why a good basis in shamatha is very helpful, not only from the point of view of ultimate realizations, but also in everyday life. Because a mind which is more settled, more clear, less caught up in all our emotions, in all our memories and thoughts and fantasies, in all our hopes and fears, is a mind which will really help us to cope so much better with our daily lives. As we become more centered and more able to ride the waves of daily life, instead of being submerged by the waves of daily life, then we will see that even just this very simple practice can be so helpful. Shamatha is very also aligned with the idea of daily mindfulness, of not just when we're sitting formally doing our breath meditation, but also during the day as much as possible, being able to connect with what is happening in a skillful way. As is more and more being pointed out, the way mindfulness is presented nowadays, in business schools and as a way for stress reduction and lowering blood level and cholesterol, etc. It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's good and it does work and it could lead to other things. But the point is that the emphasis is just on being present, on bare awareness. But actually, in the Buddha Dharma, when the Buddha is talking about mindfulness, he is talking about right mindfulness. And right mindfulness means an awareness, a mindfulness which is connected with virtuous states of mind. Right? For example, a burglar, working on a safe, and keeping very quiet, not making any noise, totally concentrated, that he is mindful, undoubted. But it would not be regarded as right mindfulness because it is connected with unwholesome states of mind. Whereas a mindfulness which notes when negative thoughts and feelings arise, when greed or aversion, irritation, pride, envy, etc. When these negative feelings arise in the mind, that mindfulness recognizes those unwholesome states of mind and works to transform them into positive states of mind. So it's therefore a part of the spiritual journey, right? Replacing negative states of mind, not by suppressing them, but by recognizing them, even naming them. You know, somebody does something which annoys us, and we can say to ourselves, you know, anger, irritation. Okay, right, you know, first we recognize the reaction we have, the response. Then we accept that. All right, right now I'm really fed up because they just cut ahead of me, or they did something which, you know, displeased me. They said the wrong thing. We recognize it, we accept it, and then, okay, what to do with it? Rather than pouring more oil on the fire, and I have a right to be angry because we say, okay, anger is a very negative emotion. It harms myself more than it harms the other person. Let's use this as an opportunity for practice. So, for example, we can say, well, instead of being angry, we can take this as a training in forbearing patience. You know, as I said yesterday, we should be grateful for people who annoy us, because otherwise how are we going to learn? They are our teachers of patience. It doesn't mean that if one finds oneself in a very abusive situation, you should just sit down and say, kick me harder. Actually, also forbearance can be very strong, very powerful. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to allow everybody just to do what they want. But the attitude behind resistance and standing up for oneself is compassion rather than anger, or the desire to get your own back, or fear. You know, the Dharma is for making us inwardly very strong, so that we go beyond hope and fear. But we cannot do that with a wild... Oh, sorry. We cannot do that with a mind that is out of control. The more we are conscious of thoughts as they come into our mind, and our responses to what is happening to us, the more we are able to have that moment of pause before we respond. Normally, somebody hits us and we respond immediately. You know, so sensory inputs come to us and we immediately react. But as we become more, the mind settles and we become more centered and more mindful, we are also more capable of poising and pausing to decide in that moment what is the skillful response. It gives us just that moment, because moment to moment we are making choices. You know, we always blame other people, but actually it's not other people, it's us. The choices we make, we always have a choice. It might be a difficult choice, but it's a choice. We always can choose how to respond. And if we respond skillfully, then gradually things work out and we take everything that happens to us onto the path. If we act unskillfully, we slide off the path. But of course we can always get back on again. So therefore, this quality of just even sitting for a short time, getting the mind settled, and then taking that into our daily life as much as possible to become more conscious during the day of our body and our mind, transforms everything. Then the whole day becomes a Dharma practice. There's no question, I don't have time. As long as we are conscious, we have time. And of course, the Tibetans have dream yogas too. So, I mean, they don't give you any time off, right? You know? Right. One of their most important practices are what to do when we think we're sleeping and having a rest. No way. So it's very important to integrate our Dharma practice into our daily life. It really cannot be overemphasized, because otherwise one just ends up feeling, well, you're resenting our daily life, resenting the family and our job and the circumstances of our life, instead of recognizing that for whatever reason, due to causes and conditions which we ourselves created in this lifetime, in past lives, this is where we are now, and where we are now is the perfect opportunity for our practice. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not nice if one has the opportunities to go into more extended retreats, but in the meantime, if that opportunity is not there, then it's fine. We have to use whatever we have. What can we learn from the situation we are in now? And use that, take it all onto the path. It's really very important. Otherwise, it's not enough just to, do a short meditation and sometimes go to a Dharma center, read Dharma books. That's very good, but it's not enough. We really have to transform our lives. The Buddha himself said that in his teaching on mindfulness, that we should first of all become more conscious of the body. He says when he's standing, he knows he's standing. When he's walking, he knows he's walking. When he's sitting down, he knows he's sitting down. When he's lying down, he knows he's lying down. In other words, just these 4 body postures of standing, walking, sitting, lying down. How aware are we while we are doing this? We're walking along the corridor, walking along the street, thinking 1,000 other things. We're not even conscious that we're walking. We're sitting and we're thinking 1,000 other things. We're not even conscious of the posture of the body as we're sitting, and so forth. We're not even in our bodies because our minds are all over the place. So it's very helpful to take, at least to start training by taking some action, which normally we do quite mindlessly, and make it something mindful. For example, brushing your hair, cleaning your teeth, drinking a cup of tea, anything which normally while we're doing it we're thinking of something else because it's so automatic. Now make that commitment to give our attention to that. All right, we're going to make attention while we're shaving or combing our hair or whatever. And so just while we're doing that, to drop everything else and just be with that action. It's very simple, but it's not so easy, because what happens is that, for example, you're combing your hair or brushing your teeth and thinking, and then, at first, yes, one is just doing that, and then the mind says, oh, look, this is easy. Anybody can do this. Look, being mindful is easy. I'm very, very mindful. I know I'm brushing my hair. What's she saying about it not being easy? It's very easy. Look, I can do this. Blah, 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 blah. And we have completely lost the plot. So the ability just to stay quietly with what we are doing, any thoughts to ignore them, and just to be focused on the action in itself is a skill. But as we begin to learn how to do it, the mind actually has a mini holiday. The mind feels very relaxed at the end of that. Just even those just few minutes of just being centered and mindful of what we're doing without endless commentary. And then slowly, slowly, the mind begins to learn how to do it, so that more and more during the day, the mind clicks in to being conscious. We can also make a commitment like, okay, when I walk, whenever I have the opportunity for walking, I will try just to rest in the body and know I'm walking. It doesn't mean that, you know, at time people say, well, if we do that, then what about my planning, you know? But of course, we can plan. We can use the mind, but we should use the mind knowing we're using the mind. You know, when we're planning, we should say, now I'm going to plan, right? So that we know we're doing it. This is the thing. So this morning we're going to move on in the shamatha and do the next stage. Yesterday we were sitting and watching the breath and allowing the breath to move in and out of the nostrils, and as much as possible ignoring the background noise of our thinking and external background noise, if there is any, because that is, you know, external noise is not important. It's just external noise. It shouldn't distract us. Internal noise is more challenging. And again, we should just recognize it doesn't need to distract us. The mind can go on chattering away to itself. We just are not interested. Somebody, Nyanaponika Thera, I think, he said it was like, all right, we want to stay in our house to do, you know, reading, for example, or some kind of meditation. And so someone is knocking at the door, wanting to come, the neighbors. And so we have a choice. Either we can ignore them and then they knock harder and we say, go away, I don't want you, get out, you know, and we slam the door in their face and we get, sit there, I'm not going to talk to my neighbors, I'm meditating. And, you know, and then the neighbors keep knocking harder, and then, you know, you keep screaming at them, and then eventually they go away, but you're sitting there, neighbors. And so the mind is very tight, and even if the neighbors retreat, the mind is very agitated and tight and tense. So that's like suppressing thoughts. I'm not going to think. Thoughts are bad things. I have to have an open, spacious, silent mind. Right, get out thoughts. You know. So eventually, if one uses that technique, it can happen. But the mind, nonetheless, it's just the thoughts are suppressed. And eventually they'll erupt. The neighbors will be on the rampage. So what normally happens is that the neighbors knock and we ignore them, and then they knock again and we think, oh, well, we'll just tell them to go away. So we open the door and there they are, our friends. And we say, oh, well, just come in, you know, just for a few minutes. And then, well, sit down. Would you like a cup of tea? And, you know, next thing you know, the neighbors have moved in with you and you've completely forgotten about meditating. So this is often what happens. You know, we sit down with good intentions, and then somehow the neighbors are so friendly, you know, we don't want to hurt their feelings. The next thing we know, that we're all sitting around having a cup of tea, and we've forgotten all about the fact that we're supposed to be watching our breath. So he said there's a third way of dealing with the thoughts, and that is that even if the neighbors come in, we ignore them. So, hi! Lovely day out, isn't it? Really nice weather. So how are you feeling nowadays? How's your arthritis? Hi! After a while, neighbors get very discouraged and they leave. You know, this is the point, is the determination to ignore them. We're not throwing them out. We're not inviting them in. We're ignoring them. After a while, when the thoughts are ignored, then of themselves, they begin to quieten down. So this is a very non-aggressive way of dealing with the thoughts. The thoughts are not the problem. The problem is that we get carried away, swept along by our thoughts. So, as proof of this, now we are going to go to the second thing. Now, imagine our concentration, our attention is clear, quite strong. Our mindfulness is now fairly steady. The Tibetans say that when we can be concentrated on 21 rounds of breath without losing the thread, when we are completely immersed in at least 21 slow rounds of breath, then we're ready to go on to the next stage. Right? So it's like if we have, the mind normally is very diffused, but now we have created like a search light. The awareness, the mindfulness is very single-pointed, focused on one object. In this case, the breath going in and out. So then, when that is stable enough that we're not swept away endlessly, we're here, merged with the object of meditation, then we take that searchlight of mindfulness, of concentration, and we turn it inside, onto the thoughts themselves. Because what we're trying to do is understand our mind. We swim in an ocean of thoughts and feelings, emotions. We're totally immersed in this ocean of thought. Everything which we know coming from outside stimuli onto our sense organs, it's made sense of by the sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness. And so our external reality is only a reality because it is interpreted by the mind. And inwardly, our thoughts, our feelings, our opinions, our memories, our sense of identity, everything depends on our mind. If we lose that part of the mind, we don't know who we are. We have no identity. So therefore, we swim really, like you look at the ocean and you see the fish in the ocean. They're so close to the ocean they don't recognize what is water, because that's their home. And likewise, we swim in an ocean of thoughts so close we don't even know what is a thought. What is a thought? We're endlessly thinking. What is a thought? Where does it come from? Where does it go to? What does it look like? So, therefore, the next step is to turn our attention to the stream of thinking. This is still shamatha. So what we do, and we cannot do it until we have a certain level of mindfulness, because otherwise we're too close to the mind. As soon as we try to look at the mind, we get immersed in the mind. Now we have to think of the mind rather like a river running by, and instead of being submerged in that river and swept along by that river, we are now sitting on the banks of the river, watching the river. We're not even putting a toe in there. We're right backwards, looking at the river running by. And so at this time, the important thing is just to sit back, watch the thinking without judging it. At this point, we're not thinking this is a good thought, this is a bad thought, this is a wise thought, this is a stupid thought. We're just seeing thoughts. Of course, one of the main problems with this practice is that people very quickly recognize how utterly boring the mind is. While we are immersed in it and carried along, it all seems very exciting. But once you stop and just look at it like a movie, I mean, then people always complain that it's so boring and very repetitive. You know, it's like watching the same old soap opera over and over every night. Oh God, not this one again. We did that. You know, which normally we're not aware of because we're so caught up in it. But when we step back and just watch it, we see how utterly unoriginal our thinking mostly is. You know, we're just repeating the same old stuff again and again, and especially the sob ones, you know. Yeah, those are big favorites. You know, all the awful things which happened to us and the nasty things people said, which many people tend to replay over and over to give them a sense of self. It's very important to recognize that our sense of ego depends on our gross mind level. In fact, our gross mind level is the ego. And the ego is the sense of self, I, is actually very happy to be miserable. This is something we should really understand. The ego is not actually interested in being happy particularly, because the more we think of poor me and all I've suffered and my traumatic whatevers that happened to me, the ego is kind of lapping it up. Me. Much more than the happiness times, actually, because the happiness times can lead to a completely different state of consciousness which the ego is not particularly involved with. It opens the heart, and the ego is not in the heart. So therefore, we begin to see this as we look at our mind, how the mind replays, what it replays, and how little it is able to really, really think anything original. But that's not the point. The content of the mind is not important, and the fact that the mind is very boring is good for us, but it's not the point. The point is just to begin to recognize that we are not our thoughts and our feelings. We have thoughts and feelings, and there's nothing wrong with having thoughts and feelings. There's nothing wrong with our discursive mind. We are not trying to get rid of the discursive mind. The discursive mind, our ordinary conceptual thinking, is very important. We couldn't exist without it. I mean, even the Buddha himself, who certainly was enlightened, but after he became enlightened, it didn't mean he didn't think. I mean, he didn't become a kind of cosmic zombie. I mean, actually, he spent the next 45 years of his life wandering around northern India, you know, setting up institutions and teaching thousands of people and being extremely active. I mean, and his followers who also, you know, attained to liberation, nonetheless, they didn't cease to exist or to think. And the Buddha himself said, well, I too use conceptual language, but I'm not fooled by it. And that's the difference. We are fooled by our minds. We think this is who I am. We identify with our thoughts. We identify with our feelings and our memories and our ideas. We think this is who I truly am. And this is what the Buddha was negating when he said there is no self. It didn't mean we don't exist. What he meant was that we do not exist in the way that we usually conceive that we exist, by identifying ourselves with the most gross level of our mental activity, which is our conceptual thinking. Conceptual thinking is very useful. And, you know, if we get our minds well trained, it's, you know, of course it's essential. But nonetheless, it's very important that we, you know, watching the movie, we don't think it's real. We recognize it's just the projection which we are giving ourselves. So therefore, this next step on the path of shamatha is a very important one, which is where we learn how to observe the mind itself. In fact, not just the Buddha, but Guru Rinpoche, Guru Padmasambhava, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, and then all the great masters after this, up until the present day, have always said that the essence of the practice is to observe the mind at all times. Now, most people cannot observe the mind for all times. I mean, they can't usually observe it for a second. But that's what we're aiming for. So, Paldanatisha, the great Bengali scholar, was a little, sometimes he says observe the mind at all times, that's the highest practice. But other times he's a bit more practical and he says, well, at least 3 times a day and 3 times at night we should observe the mind. When I was starting my practice, we have yogis in our monastery and they advised every hour observing the mind. Even just turning back and looking at the mind and thinking in this moment, what actually, just observing what the mind is thinking in this moment, that's all. Not judging it at that point, just knowing. Because we go sailing through our day and we're hardly even conscious of the undertows of our mental attitude and where is the mind mostly dwelling? What states of mind do we feel most at home in? And if they are negative states of mind, then we can work to find antidotes to that poison. If they are positive states of mind, then we can encourage them more. But we need to know. I mean, people get very depressed. Depression is, I don't know, in Puerto Rico, somebody said that you voted the happiest nation in the world. Well done. But I'm sure even a few Puerto Ricans get depressed sometimes. So the thing is that, you know, to really look at the mind and see the underpinnings of why the mind is feeling low, why the mind is depressed. And better than any psychologist, although psychologists can be useful, but better than that is really to observe our own self and see what is causing these feelings inside us and how to encourage that which is positive and transform that which is negative. So throughout the day, we should try to do this whenever we remember. Actually, the word mindfulness in Sanskrit, Pali and Tibetan, and I think also Chinese, the root of it is the word to remember. In fact, it's the common word in Tibetan for to remember. Trempa. And so its direct enemy is that we forget. We forget to remember. And so the actual practice of being mindful is very simple. In its own way, it's very easy. Also, simple, easy doesn't mean the same. But the problem is that we don't sustain it. We forget to sustain it, that's all. There's nothing stopping us. It doesn't make us less efficient, for example. Actually, it makes us much more efficient. It has been proved that people who in their jobs become so stressed out, it's not because of the job. It's because our mind cannot completely rest on the task at hand. Many people are trying to multitask. And as a result, the mind becomes stressed and it also becomes very inefficient. People make a lot of mistakes because the mind is not meant to multitask. And it's actually much more efficient and also is much less stressful for the mind to do one task and just do it. Give the whole attention to that task, then to the next task, to the next task. In that way, the mind does not stress out. And in fact, the mind becomes stronger and stronger. So it's not clever to be doing one thing and, you know, on your iPhone at the same time and then doing something else. You see people just anywhere, you know, they just can't stop. And this is very stressful for the mind. You know, I mean, anybody sees it on planes, on trains, where people are walking down the street, they're listening to something, and at the same time texting, and at the same time doing something else. I mean, there's no necessity for that. Most of the interchange on texting and things is totally trivial and stupid, and just wastes everybody's time. It's like Twitter. You know, I mean, that says it all. Twitter. So what we're trying to do is to allow the mind to have more space and more focus, and not to fill it up with all this trivia, this nonsense. It's like the internal chatter of the mind, which is in itself nonsense most of the time. It now has to be shared with everybody. As if anybody cares, you know. So we should be more careful, you know, and simplify. Really, really, you know, modern life is complicated enough. Give ourselves space and give others space. You know, you don't have to, you know, keep sending out inane messages for the sake of nothing. You know, it just interferes with other people's own inner space. So what we're going to do here now is just to sit for and first connect with the breath to get the mind settled and one-pointed. And then, so we're only going to sit for 10 minutes because we don't have all that much time. Well, we have some time, that's right. But anyway, we'll just sit for 10 minutes. So what we're going to do is just bring the attention to the breath. Then when the mind is settled, we take that attention and turn it inside. And we just settle back and watch the mind. We're not trying to stop the mind. We're not trying to alter it in any way. We are just observing. We are the witness to our mind. This ability to witness the mind is a very important step. It's not ultimate reality, but it's a huge, big step forward to get the space in the mind where we are no longer swept along by our mind. The mind is carrying on, but we are merely observing it. And in that case, we can decide that which is beneficial, that which is not beneficial. But here we are not choosing beneficial, not beneficial, skillful, unskillful. We are just knowing it. So this is a very important quality on the spiritual path, to be able to be the witness and to not be, as I say, endlessly swept along by our thinking. To know the thinking as thinking. Not me, not mine. There is already, what can I say? There is already this space between the thinking and the consciousness, the mindfulness which observes the thinking. You know, normally we don't have that space. Now we are creating that space in the mind where we can observe the thoughts as thoughts. Yes, they are thoughts. There's nothing wrong with thinking, but they are not. There is another level of consciousness beyond that, and there is another level beyond that. But right now we're dealing with the witness consciousness. The subject is the witness, and the object is the thoughts. Okay? So maybe we give that 15 minutes, because it will take a bit of time to calm the mind down. And then just try, relax. It's very important in this practice to relax. And to feel the mind very open and spacious. Yeah, I don't know in Puerto Rico if you have it, but elsewhere they have these paragliders. So it's like being a paraglider. There you are, up there. You're not going to sleep, right? You're very conscious of where you're going. But you're silent, open, spacious blue skies. And then you're looking down, observing everything below you in the silence. So this is what we're looking for now. So just give it a try. there are two main obstacles for getting into a state of shamatha. And the first of these is very obvious, which is the distracted mind. That though we try to settle the mind and acquire this ability to be one-pointed, nonetheless the mind keeps going off in all directions, and we cannot keep it focused. So the antidote to this basically is just keep trying. They say stay in a darkened room and keep warm, but sit up nicely. But basically keep your sessions also not too long. It's better to do many sessions but of short duration. You know, you really try and then relax and then really try again, rather than trying to do too long all in one go, in which case, you know, it all gets out of control. You give up. But the more insidious obstacle is the opposite, which in Tibetan is called sinking. And the reason why it is more of a challenge is that it can often mask itself as deeper levels of meditation. So it's a kind of basic sleepiness of the mind. The attention sinks. We sit there feeling peaceful, blissed out, not much thoughts. Finally getting it. So this is the problem, is that actually all that's happening is that the mind is sinking, and we're in a kind of half sleep. So the antidote to that is, of course, the opposite. If one happens again and again, to meditate in a light place, to be a little cool if possible, to sit up straight. And the important thing is to recognize that meditation is supposed to wake us up, not put us to sleep. So therefore, it's important that the mind feels increasingly alert and clear and shiny, not kind of fuzzy and somnolent. So it's a very important for us to look at the mind and see, is the mind becoming more clear, more vivid, more bright, or more dull? Some photo in Milarepa's biography, it describes how when he first started, he used to have a lighted butter lamp on his head. And you see this sometimes in vignettes on the life of Milarepa, sitting there with this butter lamp, because if you feel a slight, you know. A friend of mine used an alternative of putting a small bowl filled to the top with water on the top of her head, you know, because then again you're very conscious of sitting straight and keeping, you know, alert. You don't fall asleep. Jack Kornfield says that he meditated on the edge of a deep well. Which is another alternative. You don't go to sleep when you're on the rim of a big well. You stay very, very mindful. But this shows that this is indeed an obstacle. Now, the quality of the mind which becomes conscious of these obstacles arising, either extreme distraction or this kind of heavy sleepiness, this sinking attitude of the mind, is a quality which in Tibetan is called Sheshin, and it always comes along with mindfulness. Samprajnana, something like that it is in Sanskrit. I never can remember it. But anyway, they go together. They're always placed together. And it's this quality of mind which nobody in English has found an adequate translation for. Everybody's agreed that this word smriti or sati is going to be translated as mindfulness. Somehow everybody agreed on that one in English. But I think in Spanish they're still discussing. But this other quality which goes along with that, nobody has agreed on, and there are many, many different translations showing that there's nothing exactly right in English, so everybody has a go. But what it means is this quality of mind which checks up. It's not there the whole time. Somebody described it as like spying on the mind. It looks and sees what the mind's up to while it's meditating. You know, is the mind distracted? Okay, apply an antidote. Is the mind sinking? Okay, wake up. It's this quality which we have in the mind. Is our mindfulness running smoothly, or is it out of balance? And then it encourages us to redress that balance. So it's a very useful quality which just looks, sees how the mind's doing. If everything's okay, it just subsides again. But if something needs adjustment, it alerts us that we need to adjust. So some people translate it as alertness. Some people as introspection, some as clear comprehension, and so on. Nobody quite knows how to use it. But it's a definite faculty of the mind that while we're practicing, it just pops up, looks, and then subsides again. So the two go together. And it's very important when we're meditating and trying to develop this quality of being present and conscious, aware, that from time to time we check to make sure that everything's on keel and that we don't need to adjust anything and that everything can just keep going. So all of these qualities of practice is exactly that. It's practice. And, you know, I don't know, in English we say practice makes perfect. And that's exactly it. You know, we have to practice again and again and again. As I said yesterday, everybody knows that to become proficient in any skill, we need to practice. So we need to practice without becoming disheartened. We have to recognize that this is not something which just happens overnight, you know, slowly. We have habits of being distracted, of being unmindful, of being so totally unaware, which go back not only this lifetime but many, many lifetimes. It's just that the mind is habituated to not being conscious. And the ego wants us to be unconscious. Because the ego knows that the more conscious we come, the more the ego will diminish. I mean, the ego doesn't really exist, but it does a lot of fast footwork. So there's resistance. Because the ego knows that the more we practice, the more it is getting towards its own extinction. So the ego will always think up excuses, as we all know. And so this is why it's also very important to get our ego involved and become a supporter rather than an obstacle for us, to get the ego to be eager to practice, even though in the end it knows that this is its death. This is why these meditations on loving kindness and so forth are so important, to give us a sense of courage to keep going. So we will have a break, you will be happy to hear, for 15 minutes. And please try to come back in time because we have a lot of material. And I'd also like to answer some questions if we have time. So 15 minutes. You know, we cannot, you know, even the worst, you know, our worst enemy, we are not with them the whole time, but, you know, we cannot escape from ourselves. So therefore it's very important that we, you know, we have a friendly companion with us on the path. Because if we are always at war with ourselves, putting ourselves down, we're not going to be able to really practice the path properly. We need to have a sense of belief in our own abilities and a friendliness and encouragement towards ourselves. That despite all our faults, despite all the mistakes we have made in our life, despite everything, you know, essentially we are Buddhas, so we have nothing to worry about. And, you know, if we were so perfect, we wouldn't need a path. We wouldn't need the Dharma. We need the Dharma because we have so many problems. You know, it's not a path just for people who are perfect. If you're perfect, you don't need the path. You are the path. But it's for ordinary, flawed human beings like ourselves, therefore we need help, we need direction, but we need it from the point of view of someone who is friendly towards us, who is encouraging us, who is not always putting us down, which is our own self. You know, we have to encourage ourselves. If we don't encourage ourselves, who's going to encourage us? You know, so it's very important to recognize that merely being nasty to ourselves, criticizing ourselves, thinking of all the bad things we've done, never forgiving ourselves, is not humility. It's not. It's actually just very. It undercuts our ability to transform. And so it's very important to, you know, just as we wish to be kind to others, we have to start by being kind to ourselves. So this we dealt with yesterday, the wish that we should be well and happy, as well as, of course, all beings. And today we will bring our attention to compassion. Compassion, of course, is a very important emotion and is especially emphasized in the Mahayana tradition. The idea that we are striving on the spiritual path not just to benefit ourselves, but in order that we should be able to liberate and help all others. I mean, this is something which, if you think about it, is quite easy to understand. I mean, people who train to become doctors, for example, their motivation is presumably is not just so that if they get sick, they'll be able to cure themselves. I mean, their motivation is that they can then go out and cure all the other who are sick. That's the point of all that training. And so likewise, on the spiritual path, we are not merely trying to really become the masters of our mind. We are not merely trying to, you know, develop this awareness and open-heartedness just so that we will feel better, so I can be happier. But so that we can then really be able to help others likewise to transcend our ordinary egotistic and selfish mind frames in which we create so many problems both for ourselves and for others. So therefore compassion is a very important quality that we are practicing out of compassion for the world. And here we will just do a short practice on a very important meditation in the Tibetan tradition, which is called Tonglen. I'm sure many of you already have practiced Tonglen. It belongs within the Tibetan tradition to all of the different lineages. It doesn't belong to any one lineage, although it was especially emphasized and I think introduced into Tibet by Palden Atisha, who was the great 10th century Bengali scholar and practitioner who came to Tibet and spent the last 10 years of his life there, and really, to my mind, got Tibetan Buddhism on track with his emphasis not only on refuge but on bodhicitta, on the why are we practicing? This is the point. It's not just what practices we are doing, but why we are doing them. The motivation, the underlying motivation. Is it based on self-cherishing mind? Just I'm doing this so then I'll feel better? Or is it genuinely based on compassion for all beings, that we need to learn these skills in order that now and in all future lifetimes we can really be of benefit for the world? So he emphasized very much bodhicitta and also something called lojong, or mind training, which is that of really aspiring for the happiness of others and recognizing that our genuine happiness comes through making others feel happy. And also along in the lojong, the idea of taking everything which is difficult to that happens on the path. You know, everything, all the difficult people, difficult situations in our life, you know, problems and loss and death and sickness and all the things which normally we regard as being an obstacle. I would practice, but you know, there's this problem and that problem. Recognizing that our obstacles are actually our greatest opportunities. And this is how we gain the strength and cultivate qualities needed on the path. So these lojong teachings also were integrated into all the traditions in Tibet, and very much kept, I think, the whole system very much on track, so that up until the present day it's remained very pure in its aspirations to benefit others, and didn't just degenerate into magic and power. So one of the important lojong practices is this practice of tonglen, which is basically it means sending out and giving, giving out and bringing in. And it's something which is practiced by everybody, even the greatest lamas at the time of death, or when they're very, very sick. If people ask them, what practices are you doing? They normally would say Guru Yoga and Tonglen. So it has many, many applications. But the basic idea is that one, well, to take a very basic practice. You imagine someone, or you're in the presence of someone who, for example, is sick, very ill. Then one will, with the in-breath, imagine taking all their sickness and the karma which created that sickness, and the causes and conditions of everything which is it's difficult for them, not just the sickness, but everything surrounding that. Visualize like a vacuum cleaner going. We are bringing in all of that into oneself in the form of dark light or smoke, some people prefer. I mean, anyway, some darkness. We visualize taking all of that darkness into ourselves through the breath, and it goes down into the center of our chest again, where if one wishes, but you don't need to, but formally, it's you visualize a little like a little black pearl. This represents our self-cherishing mind. Self-cherishing mind here means the mind which is thinking, I'm so sorry you're sick, but I'm glad it's not me. Right? The most common question is, this doesn't really work, does it? because, you know, yes, people would like to think of taking all their sickness, but they don't really want to take all their sickness. So this is very helpful because it reveals to us this deep-seated self-cherishing mind. Yes, we want to be compassionate, but not that compassionate, right? Which is very helpful for us to understand that. So then we visualize all this dark light coming down with the breath into the center of the chest, hits and absorbs into the black pearl of self-cherishing mind. And because if our aspiration is genuine, if we genuinely wish to take in that sickness or that trouble, then that will destroy the self-cherishing mind, right? And so therefore we visualize that that little black pearl then transforms immediately into either a very white, brilliant pearl or a diamond, which again represents our Buddha nature. Buddha nature, no matter how much pollution there may be, is never sullied. It's always pure. It never ever can be diminished. So therefore, from the diamond at the heart, representing our true nature, we then, with the out-breath, send out white light or golden light, whatever, and then visualize that that is completely, again, soaking into every cell of that other being and completely filling them with health and happiness and all the good things we could possibly wish for that person. All the strength of our genuine wisdom, compassion, mind is soaking into them. And so with the breath, one visualizes the darkness. With the out-breath comes the light. So this meditation, which is a very fundamental meditation, can be used for anything, basically. One can use it for people who are sick, people who are having trouble, a whole nation who is having problems. One also can use it if oneself is sick, which is what the lamas are doing. Say, for example, one has a headache or one has cancer. You know, you might have a migraine, you might have cancer, you might have some sickness. And instead of lying there feeling sorry for yourself and wishing that it would go away, one uses that and visualizes, for example, if one has a migraine or a specific kind of cancer, that all other beings in the world who are suffering from this particular ailment, all of their suffering is taken in on oneself. One will gladly receive all that if they can be free. So then one visualizes all that darkness coming into oneself, and from one's primordial pure awareness comes out all the light to heal them and to replace them with health and happiness. So in this way, one's own suffering is transformed. It's no longer a form of suffering. It's a form of embodying one's compassion. And you know, instead of just lying there feeling sorry, one suddenly, it opens the heart to recognize also many, many beings have this problem. I mean, if one loses someone one really loves, of course one grieves. But at a certain point, if one is grieving too much, for too long, then it's good to do Tonglen. All the people who have lost someone that they loved, may all their pain come in on me. I will take it. When I was young, when I was about 8 years old, my mother had a shop, but she was ill in bed with kidney stones. So she was in a lot of pain with these kidney stones. It's one of the most painful things you can have. And I was in the kitchen getting ready for school, and my nylon dress hit against the electric fire, and next thing I knew, I was up in flames. So I remember running up the stairs and along the corridor, screaming, of course, because it was a nylon dress, so because it was all up in flames, and rushing into my mother's bedroom. And then, of course, she put out the flames and I think put penicillin. She said my whole back was one great big blister. And so then she wrapped me in a clean sheet. And then I went up to the ceiling. You know, I had a near-death experience. And there were all these beings of light saying, "Come with us, come with us." And I thought, oh, I'm going to die. Oh, this will be interesting. My mother was a spiritualist, I should explain, and every week we had seances in our house when the neighbors would come in, and one of our neighbors was psychic, so she would channel various spirits. So, I mean, the idea of death was an everyday subject of conversation in our house. And so then I thought, oh, I'm going to die, oh, good. And I mean, I looked down at this little burned body down below, and I absolutely didn't want to go down there. I wanted to go with these beings of light. But then, meantime, the neighbors had heard the screams, so they started coming in. I mean, in those days, you didn't lock your doors, right? So they started coming in to find out what was wrong, and then next thing I knew, I was back in my body again. So then the next thing I remember, I was lying on this trolley in the hospital, and the doctor was saying to me, "You're a very brave little girl. You must be in tremendous pain." And I said, "No, there's no pain." He kind of looked at me, but he didn't say anything. And so I was in hospital for weeks and weeks. And, you know, my whole back was burned off on the side of my face. And, you know, even if you, if you, you know, burn the tip of your finger, how painful it is. My whole back was burned off. There was no pain. And I have no scars. So I was a little girl. I didn't think about it. Or the nurses and doctors all just thought I was being terribly brave. I didn't even think about it. I remember being quite happy in the hospital because I felt fine. I didn't have to go to school. Years and years later, I mentioned this to my mother. And she said, at the time that I was lying there, unconscious, she thought I was going to die. And so she prayed to the spirit guides and said, "Please don't let her die. And please don't let her suffer. She's too young to suffer. Give all her suffering to me. I will take her suffering. Let me have it. Just take it away from her." My mother already was in agony with her kidney stones, but she would have welcomed my pain if I could have been relieved of it. She was unconsciously doing Tonglen. Now, as a result of that, I'm quite sure the spirits decided to, because of her pure compassion, that I would not need to suffer. But they didn't give it to her, of course. I mean, she didn't feel it. But if she had, she would have welcomed it. That's the point. You know, this is what we're talking about. Just as a mother loves her child, her only child, the Buddha said, so we must develop loving kindness and compassion for other beings. So what I'm saying is that this pure aspiration has to come really from the heart. But of course, at first, it's very difficult for us to do that unless it's somebody that we genuinely love more than ourselves. But if we do develop that ability to really love others beyond ourselves, then it is very powerful. So here we are just going to do the other way in which we can use Tonglen is first towards ourselves. Because again, people have difficulty feeling compassion to themselves. They can feel compassion for others, but towards themselves we are very unforgiving. And so many people have, traumatic memories, or just very sad memories, or just they don't, people are suffering. So before we can really open up our heart to the suffering of all other beings, it's very important first to feel our own pain and with loving compassion and acceptance. So therefore it's a very useful to do this practice also directed towards ourselves. So some people find it helpful to think of themselves at a particular time in their life when they really were very suffering, and this is what, we carried that on with us for the rest of our lives, basically. So a lot of people, of course, therefore choose a time when they were children. Maybe they had a very difficult childhood, or there was something which happened which really was very painful at that time. If there is something like that, then you can imagine that child that you were, maybe just in front of you, and do the practice. Think of that child and its pain, and just absorb the pain into ourselves with great love and compassion for that child who didn't know how to deal with that pain, who couldn't process it. And then giving out light and love until gradually the child begins to become more relaxed, more happy, more cheerful. Slowly, slowly, slowly it begins to heal. And so, or whatever it is, if you can see yourself as yourself, I mean, however it works, there's no, set rule about this. With so much meditation, there are books, but in the end we have to adapt it to our own needs, because otherwise it doesn't really work. We have to see what really affects our hearts, because these meditations, although we have to use our mind, in the end the effect has to come from here, because otherwise it's just a mental exercise which isn't going to transform us. So there has to, with this meditation on compassion directed towards ourselves, comes a lot of forgiveness, a lot of acceptance, a lot of sympathy for the pain that we feel within ourselves, and the fact that we are not living our potential, that we have great potential, because as I say, we all have Buddha nature, but we don't know that, and so we suffer. We want so much to be happy. We put so much energy into it. And yet, at the end, we end up messing everything up and messing everybody else up, messing our whole planet up. And it's not intentional. But we are so deluded that we don't know how to make skillful responses to situations. Isn't that sad? Even if nothing else, even if we're thinking, well, I'm not sad, I'm perfectly okay, I've got a nice house, a big car, and this and this and this. But, still, we are not who we should be. We really are not. We are living at such a low level compared with the fullness of what we could be as our true potential. It's like we're locked in a little bud, you know, a rosebud. Well, rosebuds are very nice, but you know, they have this incredible potential to become full-blown roses. And yet, normally we just live and die as little buds. We never open up and reveal our true nature. So that's very sad. And so, therefore, when we think of ourselves and then gradually start to think of other beings, this is also not just our mundane problems, our psychological problems, but the fact that we have not recognized our genuine potential, which we need a human life for. That's the genuine compassion. And why compassion arises with wisdom is that the clearer we see the problem of the situation, the more compassion arises, because we see, you know, we're trying so hard and it's all going in the wrong direction. It's not hitting the point. So, can we just sit for 5 minutes now and just see ourselves in whatever stage of life now or any time back to our babyhood, whatever is most meaningful for us, as a time when we really felt ourselves intrinsically not very happy, and that unhappiness percolating down into our present. Or just see ourselves right now and you know, really bring in with the in-breath all the disillusion, all the pain, all the problems, ill health, if we have ill health, anything. Psychological pain, physical pain, spiritual pain, whatever. We take that in, and with the out-breath, we send out the light which goes through every atom of our being and transforms us into our true potential, who we really are, if only we knew it. So just for 5 minutes, we just sit and try that. So then think of somebody that you love a lot, somebody, your parents, your partner, your children, a good friend, especially if at this point they are suffering in any way. Maybe they have some sickness, maybe they have some problems in their lives. Try to think of somebody that you love, but who at this time are suffering for some reason. And then visualize them in front of you. If you're at home, you can have their photo. And just again, with the in-breath, bring in all of their problems, their sickness, or whatever is their trouble. And not just the sickness, but the causes of the sickness, the karma which created this, all of it. And just visualize bringing that into hitting this seed of self-cherishing mind, and then that transforming, and from the depths of our true nature, which is infinite and never ever polluted by anything, that the light goes out through the nostrils and fills them and removes all of their troubles, and they become healthy and happy and fully invigorated by this very powerful, compassionate, loving light. So again, just for a few minutes, we'll think like that. So now we think again of a neutral person, someone that we normally don't really think about one way or the other. We never consider that they have problems, that they have difficulties in their life. Maybe they have ill health, or some member of their family or someone they love is very ill. Maybe they've just lost somebody that they cared for. So many problems. You know, we go around the streets and everybody has something, you know. What was that saying on the wall about difficulties with people? That's right. Treat everyone kindly because everyone is fighting a hard battle. Yeah, I mean, just to remember that. Everybody has problems. It's not just us, it's not just our family, our friends. Everybody, treat people kindly because everybody has their own battle to fight. And so they don't need more problems, you know? So therefore now just think of somebody that we don't usually think much about, but somebody, you know, like as I say, a neighbor or a colleague at work or somebody that you meet every day. In the old days it used to be a postman, but I guess nowadays people don't have postmen. But you know, just somebody that you see regularly without thinking about. And now just think about them. You know, just really think of all their problems, and they're probably in debt or they're, you know, struggling with this or that. Or everybody has problems. This is dukkha. This is samsara. And so just bring them into focus and imagine it taking all their suffering away from them and replacing it with joy and peace and happiness and fulfillment. How wonderful that would be. And now someone that we have difficulties with, somebody who pushes our buttons, somebody either in the present that we find difficulty dealing with, or someone in the past that caused us a lot of grief. And maybe we are also more capable of poising and pausing to decide in that moment what is the skillful response. It gives us just that moment, because moment to moment we are making choices. You know, we always blame other people, but actually it's not other people, it's us. The choices we make, we always have a choice. It might be a difficult choice, but it's a choice. We always can choose how to respond. And if we respond skillfully, then gradually things work out and we take everything that happens to us onto the path. If we act unskillfully, we slide off the path. But of course we can always get back on again. So therefore, this quality of just even sitting for a short time, getting the mind settled, and then taking that into our daily life as much as possible to become more conscious during the day of our body and our mind, transforms everything. Then the whole day becomes a Dharma practice. There's no question, I don't have time. As long as we are conscious, we have time. And of course, the Tibetans have dream yogas too. So, I mean, they don't give you any time off, right? You know? Right. One of their most important practices are what to do when we think we're sleeping and having a rest. No way. So it's very important to integrate our Dharma practice into our daily life. It really cannot be overemphasized, because otherwise one just ends up feeling, well, you're resenting our daily life, resenting the family and our job and the circumstances of our life, instead of recognizing that for whatever reason, due to causes and conditions which we ourselves created in this lifetime, in past lives, this is where we are now, and where we are now is the perfect opportunity for our practice. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not nice if one has the opportunities to go into more extended retreats, but in the meantime, if that opportunity is not there, then it's fine. We have to use whatever we have. What can we learn from the situation we are in now? And use that, take it all onto the path. It's really very important. Otherwise, it's not enough just to, do a short meditation and sometimes go to a Dharma center, read Dharma books. That's very good, but it's not enough. We really...
Vamos a las oraciones para antes y después de las enseñanzas. A tomar refugio. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que puedo obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema. Por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Y ahora vamos a la ofrenda de mandala breve. Sashi Puki Junshin Medo Pramri Pravlinshi
So today we carry on with the practice on SHAMATA and going through the illimitable meditations. So the point of SHAMATA is that of itself it will not lead us, it will not give us enlightenment. Yes, states of mind. So it's therefore a part of the spiritual journey, right? Replacing negative states of mind, not by suppressing them, but by recognizing them, even naming them. You know, somebody does something which annoys us, and we can say to ourselves, you know, anger, irritation. Okay, right, you know, first we recognize the reaction we have, the response. Then we accept that. All right, right now I'm really fed up because they just cut ahead of me, or they did something which, you know, displeased me. They said the wrong thing. We recognize it, we accept it, and then, okay, what to do with it? Rather than pouring more oil on the fire, and I have a right to be angry because we say, okay, anger is a very negative emotion. It harms myself more than it harms the other person. Let's use this as an opportunity for practice. So, for example, we can say, well, instead of being angry, we can take this as a training in forbearing patience. You know, as I said yesterday, we should be grateful for people who annoy us, because otherwise how are we going to learn? They are our teachers of patience. It doesn't mean that if one finds oneself in a very abusive situation, you should just sit down and say, kick me harder. Actually, also forbearance can be very strong, very powerful. It doesn't mean that you have to allow everybody just to do what they want. But the attitude behind resistance and standing up for oneself is compassion rather than anger, or the desire to get your own back, or fear. You know, the Dharma is for making us inwardly very strong, so that we go beyond hope and fear. But we cannot do that with a wild... Oh, sorry. We cannot do that with a mind that is out of control. The more we are conscious of thoughts as they come into our mind, and our responses to what is happening to us, the more we are able to have that moment of pause before we respond. Normally, somebody hits us and we respond immediately. You know, so sensory inputs come to us and we immediately react. But as we become more, the mind settles and we become more centered and more mindful. Yeah? What about it? Okay. 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 No problem. Okay?
No.
Okay. So the point is that shamatha itself will not give us enlightenment, but it prepares the ground. The unprepared mind cannot cope with deeper levels of practice, like analyzing the mind and mental and material phenomena, and recognizing that which goes beyond the ordinary conceptual mind, because it is not a fit instrument to do so. It's as if you're a surgeon. Then, before the operation, you have to prepare your tools. You have to see that your scalpel is clean and sharp and capable of preparing for the operation. You will not do the operation with a blunt and rusty old knife. You have to have everything prepared properly so that one can go forth with confidence. So here we're working with the mind, and our ordinary, uncontrolled, wild mind simply cannot acquire the depth of practice needed for the breakthrough. Even if we get a momentary glimpse of something beyond the conceptual mind, it cannot last, because the basis is not yet ready to hold it. It's not prepared. So this is why it is so important to have a strong basis in its calm abiding meditation. One Lama said to me that if you have a strong shamatha, the rest of the Dharma is in the palm of your hands. But, you know, we are very impatient. You know, how long does it take to get enlightened? You know, really, people are always asking what is the quickest, easiest way. But ultimately, there is no quick, easy way, no matter what publicity is given to certain techniques. With a mind which is not ready, which is not prepared, even if, as I say, one gets some experiences, it will not be enough to really permeate the whole of the deeper levels of our consciousness. So this is why a good basis in shamatha is very helpful, not only from the point of view of ultimate realizations, but also in everyday life. Because a mind which is more settled, more clear, less caught up in all our emotions, in all our memories and thoughts and fantasies, in all our hopes and fears, is a mind which will really help us to cope so much better with our daily lives. You know, as we become more centered and more able to ride the waves of daily life, instead of being submerged by the waves of daily life, then we will see that even just this very simple practice can be so helpful. Shamatha is very also aligned with the idea of daily mindfulness, of not just when we're sitting formally doing our breath meditation, but also during the day as much as possible, being able to connect with what is happening in a skillful way. As is more and more being pointed out, the way mindfulness is presented nowadays, you know, in business schools and in, you know, as a way for stress reduction and lowering blood level and cholesterol, etc. It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's good and it does work and it could lead to other things. But the point is that the emphasis is just on being present, on bare awareness. But actually, in the Buddha Dharma, when the Buddha is talking about mindfulness, he is talking about right mindfulness. And right mindfulness means an awareness, a mindfulness which is connected with virtuous states of mind. Right? For example, a burglar, you know, working on a safe, you know, and keeping very quiet, not making any noise, totally concentrated, that he is mindful, undoubted. But it would not be regarded as right mindfulness because it is connected with unwholesome states of mind. Whereas a mindfulness which notes when negative thoughts and feelings arise, when greed or aversion, irritation, pride, envy, etc., when these negative feelings arise in the mind, that mindfulness recognizes those unwholesome states of mind and works to transform them into positive